Welcome back to the Scrubbed In series. I'm your host, Tyre Kresat. In today's episode, we dive into one of the most overlooked yet critical pain points in healthcare: documentation. The stuff we click through, scroll past, and often drown in. But what if AI could change that? Not just for billing, but to actually help us, the clinicians. I'm joined by Justin Liu, co-founder and CEO of Charta Health, a company using artificial intelligence to flag inefficiencies, optimize documentation, and even help clinicians make sense of the chaos inside the EMR. Justin comes from the tech world with experience spanning Google Health and complex system design, and he's now applying that precision to the messiness of healthcare. In this episode, we will explore how Charta is tackling a problem that costs hospitals billions, burns out staff, and slows down care, and how it's giving clinicians a clearer, cleaner way to work. Justin, welcome to the show.
Great to be here.
So let's start from the beginning, Justin. You have a very interesting path from IT to product development and now into healthcare. What sparked that journey or that quest?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think, for me, Charta Health is really, as you and many may know, my really first foray into healthcare. My background is almost exclusively on the technology side of the world, coming from Google, a number of different startups, working in, data and AI infrastructure. Our last company that my co-founder and I worked on was acquired by OpenAI and, powers their infrastructure layer today, all really on the technology side. For us, when we started this company, it was really about looking for a really good space for some of this technology that we were really excited about and familiar with and looking for really good applications for. Looking for a place, I think, where, one, there was kind of like a lot of unstructured data being constantly generated and, more importantly, people deriving a lot of value and impact and, out of reasoning over that data and answering questions about that data. A particular application of these large language models that we had been, researching and really been interested in. Just found healthcare to be a great sweet spot for that. Really found our way here and was pulled into the space by all the people that we now, are lucky to work alongside.
Interesting. No, I know, from my experience that, clinical documentation has a lot of great value, but unfortunately it's untapped in a way because it's difficult to go through it. It's a lot of, takes a lot of time to evaluate and process. So was there a specific moment or experience that helped, shape the idea for Charta Health?
It's a good question. I wouldn't say there was like it's interesting. A lot of healthcare founders, especially, they have like this one magic moment where they're like, hey, like my family had this one experience, or, I had this horrible experience with healthcare. And there are a lot of horrible experiences with healthcare that a lot of people have and serve as great inspirational moments for these. To be totally genuine about this, I think certainly my co-founder and I did not get into healthcare because we had this one, magical moment or horribly exactly. And it was like huge, single sympathetic moment for us. It was very organic for us, path for us to find our way into this world of documentation. I think early on after, Scott and I, my co-founder and I kind of picked healthcare as the space we wanted to really spend, the next decade or more of our lives working on and a place where we really wanted to go deep. One of the first things that we did was we really partnered with a number of larger hospitals and healthcare providers to kind of actually go into their back office, shadow their workers, do actually work alongside them. We actually got, as you may know, both certified as medical coders, professional medical coders, got our CPC licenses in the process, really to work alongside these people, in the back office of these healthcare providers. To really understand the day-to-day of, the business side of medicine and the back office side of medicine. I think often one of the areas that, is overlooked. People really think about, taking care of patients in the room, but, whether it's not just billers and coders, but even as clinicians themselves, you have to spend a lot of time to actually make the whole system run. All the time you spend charting and writing documentation and then, making sure it looks good and is compliant, and there's insurance companies involved and government agencies involved and back office folks, looking at your documentation. That's really where my co-founder has spent a lot of time looking through and building in and exploring trying to deeply understand what the day-to-day problems were and where we thought, technology could really make an impact.
I mean, kudos to you for going through the back doors and learning how the business model of how healthcare runs. Because we physicians, that's not an area of strength from our end. Now, regarding Charta, I read many things about it and on your website. Uh, what is the core problem that you're trying to solve with it, or you're trying to address with the software or the AI technology that you developed?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. So, at Charta, we have quite a broad vision here where, the mandate we really have is we really just build AI that reasons over medical data of pretty much any kind here. With the fundamental thesis, I think that, if we want doctors to really spend their time taking care of patients and really all the dollars and staff members and people in healthcare really focusing time are actually taking care of clinicians, taking care of patients, excuse me. Um, our goal is to have them spend as little time as possible actually having to do any work in the back office. And really all of that begins, as you know, at the chart level. It's really this writing this documentation, reading this documentation, compiling documentation on top of documentation based on the visit notes that really makes up the majority of the lost money that it takes in the overhead of administrating and doing the business side of healthcare. And so our goal really here is to build AI that, really reviews all of these medical records for you, generates everything that you need to so that you don't have to, as a clinician, actually spend time on the documentation itself. So really the motion that we take here is, any time that as a provider or a hospital, you would review medical records, for pretty much any reason, our goal is to build AI that will do that work for you in a way that not only can we do things that are very sophisticated and look through them for all kinds of reasons, billing, compliance, clinical like. The main leverage you get here is as the resource it takes to review medical records is very expensive.
Extensive, yeah.
A note is generated every single time you see a patient, and to really get a chance to review 100% of all of the records of all of your patients is really not something that was possible before until the advent of some of these more modern AI technologies that have really enabled this possibility for the first time.
Yeah, I mean, having something that can review all the notes of a patient was something always we physicians dreamt of, and I think you came up with a solution for our dreams and questions. Now, you mentioned that the AI or the software can review hundreds or many notes in a quick or a brief period of time. What is it exactly that it looks in the clinician's note? Is it a missing terminology? Is it any missing description? Like what helps improve these inefficiencies in the documentation that Charta or the software looks for?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the short answer is actually that we will look for almost anything you want us to. Now, I'm not trying to avoid your question. I can give you specific examples of what this looks like, but it's actually fundamental to the motion that we take, and I think is what really differentiates, our company and the mission of what we're trying to do as to why this works. Ultimately, the biggest problem in healthcare when you try to build any piece of technology that works across all of healthcare is that it never really works because every single healthcare provider and hospital setup is very different. The notes look different, the patients are different, the requirements are different, the insurance companies you're contracted with are different. And so ultimately, a lot of the work is very custom. Even when we try and pick, what seems like an identical use case on an identical specialty in an identical location, it's still very different, as you know, on the inside. But I would say typically the categories by which we review medical records for are typically in one of three categories. Either it is a billing related review, which could mean we're looking for, coding opportunities or, coding issues where, the documentation does not support the codes you've built for, or other things that can influence your top line, like your denials, if we can catch a denial kind of before it happens by reviewing the record before it goes out. So billing is kind of one category. Similarly, I would say compliance is another similar category when you have documentation requirements, either to the insurance companies that you're contracted with or to the government, or maybe just compliance that your chief clinical or chief medical officer has mandated that they would like your notes to look like in a certain way. Make sure you didn't copy paste your notes, or trying to make sure that you hit all the requirements of ensuring a good and complete documentation. So that's kind of the second category. And the third is really on the clinical side. So this could be both the, again, chief clinical or medical officer here, interested in just performing good patient care, and maybe they perhaps are trying to set a standard of like what it means to take good care of patients. Or, again, obviously it's one of not that many businesses where your boss is almost never in the room with you as a doctor. And so the only way to really almost like QA your product or your service is by looking at these doctor's notes and trying to make sure like, hey, if the patient, came in with chief complaints A and B, did you give them, treatment C or prescribe them medication D, et cetera? Those are also the categories of things that we can look for with AI.
I think you might have touched point on this question. You mentioned that the software has the ability to improve compliance with the documentation for the different insurance companies. Let's say in my practice, I deal with 3-4 different insurance companies. Does the software know like each patient's insurance and make sure that my note is in compliance with their terminology so that my billing is optimized for them?
Exactly. So that is totally the work we do. I mean, I should say there's no magic. We don't guess kind of like what insurance company, but that's typically inside your database in your EMR. We can find that information. Somebody has likely performed an eligibility check. They collected their insurance information. Hopefully, everybody, as you know, the first thing in the doctor's office is you collect their insurance information, for better or for worse. But that information is there. And we do, of course, have a wealth of knowledge ourselves in just the experience of work that we do, kind of what, this insurance company and this location wants to see and doesn't want to see in their, denials or claims or their documentation. Certainly, again, one of the reasons why the work we do is very custom, could be dependent on the specific payer contract that your practice has signed with that payer. Even if it's the same specialty and payer and same region, could still look different in the requirements that they have depending on what you signed.
Interesting. So you can adapt the system to each, practice, to each hospital system to optimize the billing for each, case. In that.
Exactly. I would say we have to. It's hard to be useful without doing that. And again, I think going back to this point of this, this piece of customization and really trying to wrap our arms around every single healthcare provider that we partner with and do work for, building exactly what you want to see as a clinician based on what the care you want to perform is and what your notes look like and what your insurance companies expect to see inside those notes and those codes. All of that is very specific to your practice and your practice only. There's a funny saying I've heard in healthcare technology. They say when you work with health systems, when you've seen one, you've seen one. And it's really, I think, true across the board for almost everything. It's never going to look quite the same twice. And so you have to have a very adaptable technology to do business in healthcare.
And how does the system take, how long does the system take, for example, to learn each practice insurance style to kind of be customized to it? Is that a lengthy time-wise process, or it's a quick process?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I'm glad you asked this. So I mean, getting this time down is one of the hardest things that we've had to go through as building a company. I would say right now, on average, we take between 2 and 3 weeks to build a working version of something that is very specific to your practice. It's part of what has made our motion scalable to begin with. Otherwise, traditionally, the challenge with this is, of course, you might take months or years to build a single AI model that works for one practice, and then when the requirements change, which is the worst part, we have to throw everything out the window again. Now, what's really beautiful about these modern large language technologies is they're extremely adaptable and programmable. I'm sure you have yourself and most of your listeners tried things like ChatGPT, and it is really, really good at doing exactly what you'd like it to do without a ton of training. You didn't have to feed ChatGPT 1,000 examples to try and give you the right answer. You kind of ask it the right questions, and it's able to do exactly what you'd like it to do. That's really the beauty of, I think, these more modern technologies in AI that have allowed us to be able to do this for the first time ever.
Interesting. And have you seen in your experience so far, how much would you say was the improvement in, let's say, the documentation of the clinicians or the physicians at a practice before and after implementing your software?
That's a good question. So it depends on what you're having us review the notes for, the metrics by which you would measure improvement here. Some of the maybe more easy to agree on metrics are on the revenue side. For example, if we can measure by just the total amount of revenue captured, or maybe RVUs per patient in outpatient care, just the amount that you're getting back in reimbursements, is one kind of metric. In that case, we typically see about just over 10% increase in most of the specialties that we work in, of increase in revenue, which is, of course, is actually extremely dramatic. Not surprising to many who are within the space that on average, the codes are so underbilled. That's the average revenue lift that we see, including both up codes and down codes. So we'll correct the code to what we think the correct code is. On average, we see about an 11% lift. Into the case of denials, this can also vary dramatically, but we typically will see a denial drop of as much as 70 to 75% usually, when we try and review the note before it goes out to look for things that we know have a chance of being denied, or in many cases the practice actually knows that this is going to get denied, but there's just no way for them to kind of like institute this across all of their notes because the rules are so custom and there's so many. We can reduce a dramatic amount there.
Wow.
In other cases like compliance and clinical quality, it becomes much more subjective. If you're trying to ensure kind of a standard of care, you can definitely see improvement over time. But I think what's more interesting even than just the improvement you can measure is you can actually just, for the first time ever, get visibility in the metrics and analytics that we can show you. You can see across thousands and thousands of doctors exactly which ones are not doing a great job in their documentation, or if really
Documentation.
the documentation is a reflection of the care often, if you're looking for clinical work. And so you can see exactly which doctors you need to spend more time educating on either how to perform better care or how to write better documentation to properly reflect that the work was performed.
I mean, 70% drop in the denial rate, that is a very impressive number. I've always, wondered if one day I have my own, practice, how can I manage with the complexity of all the billing and the coding to keep my business running? And, a solution that many physicians do is, hire outside billers and coders. So with the implementation of a software like yours, these are significant revenue changes that can keep, or can make or break a practice.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, we've been privileged enough to work with practices that have we've single handedly helped turn profitable. Especially in these kind of low margin businesses, like these massive outpatient, primary care and urgent care practices, for example, where they are famously running on like half or 1 point margins. You can imagine increasing their gross revenue by double digits is completely transformational to their business.
Wow. Yeah. Now, does the software, or let me say, who uses your software? Is it a hospital system, a big hospital, or is it more focused towards outpatient clinics, individualized private practice, surgery centers, dialysis centers, for example?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we do quite a bit of work across the board, but the majority of the work that we do is focused on outpatient. We're really, I think, looking for a place where there is a lot of notes. And so, the more documentation you have, the less resources you have to look through all those documentation, which is where AI becomes the most leveraged. And so when you think about these like massive outpatient specialties that generate a lot of notes, they see a lot of patients, these high volume, but on the flip side, typically low reimbursement specialties, where in primary care, for example, you'll see thousands of patients, but each one is only maybe giving you to 100 or 150 bucks per visit. These are the places where having a human review them is extremely expensive, and you would never be able to properly get the insights you want at any cost effectiveness. But with AI, it's much more highly leveraged for the first time. We can do work kind of like up and down the market, but we are almost always working with some kind of group within outpatient. even at health systems, will typically work with the outpatient arms of health systems today. Um, but yeah, the other area that we can do work that can be interesting, even if you have less patients, is if there's simply a lot of documentation. And one good example of that is in home health. Home health, where you may not necessarily have a ton of patients specifically to your organization, but in home health, the billing is of course much more complex, and there's ACs and face-to-faces and plan of cares referrals, all these things that you have to look through to get authorized for each episode of care. And in that case, the sheer amount of documentation that you have to look through with staff members, warrants AI being extremely highly leveraged to do work with.
Now, because I'm a surgeon, I'm biased towards surgical practices. Have you had any surgical outpatient centers that you've been working with?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we have done some work with health systems and multi-specialty work that also do have surgical centers. But the work that we do today, the main reason we do not focus on surgery specialists today is because the work that you do, each operation or each visit that you take is typically much more high dollar value. And because of that, you can imagine if you only see a few patients a day, and each patient is worth a lot of money, thousands, tens of thousands of dollars, sometimes even hundreds of thousands of dollars for a single visit. In that case, using AI is, I wouldn't say unleveraged, but maybe not so important to you. Maybe you want many, more than not just one, but many humans to look through all your documentation and all your coding. You might be willing to spend, hundreds of dollars to make tens of thousands of dollars on your documentation and make sure that everything looks good here. And because of that, there's a little bit less leverage of what you may be able to get with AI. Whereas on the other side, if we're working with behavioral health or primary care and urgent care, the visit itself is only worth 100, 150 bucks to you. If you had a human look through every single one, you'd be running a charity. Every single dollar, every single visit, you'd be losing money. And so that's kind of the reason why the more notes you have and the less that visit is worth, it makes it a lot easier for us to do kind of very high value work together.
Got it. So the return on your investment is more worth if you have more notes or documentation that you're writing.
Exactly.
Now, a question just popped into my mind. You're saying that the software can review all the charts, improve compliance and documentation style. I mean, theoretically, at least it can improve my documentation to kind of decrease medical litigation liability from the sense of how proper or neat is my documentation. Is that a thing that you've used your software for, or is that a concept in the mind?
We have definitely seen that before. Remember that this is used to review documentation. And so what you could do is we can work with like a chief compliance officer, for example, who wants to review all your notes for potential liability issues, maybe for the purposes of training doctors to write better documentation so you don't get sued based on what's in your documentation. Certainly an application of what you can use this AI for, and we've done many examples of that in the past. Really, again, it's anytime that you want to ensure your documentation or the care given, is reaching a proper standard so you can get reimbursed correctly, or, you can take the best care of the patient as possible, is always an application that you can use AI to review records for.
Got it. Now, physicians and people in the healthcare sector are relatively, compared to the other fields, I'd say, are slow adapters or adopters of change, especially when it comes to technology. It feels weird to us. We're not so tech savvy people. Have you had challenges in physicians trying to adopt and accept, AI softwares like Charta, especially for concerns of patient information privacy, HIPAA compliance, legal liability issues, and all these things?
Yeah, it's a good question. So certainly the answer is yes. It's not that easy, as you know better
Yeah,
than I do, to get not just doctors themselves, but really healthcare organizations and hospitals. All the operators are pretty well known to be very conservative actors compared to many other industries when it comes to trying out new technology, and for good reason. I would add, you're taking care of
Definitely.
human lives, and of course you should be very careful about what kind of technology you allow in. A few things I would say about this are like, one, when you do work in the back office, typically organizations in healthcare are a lot more receptive. If you're not actually influencing the doctor in the room at the time of the visit, actually affecting what medication you're prescribing, or where you're snipping somebody in surgery, anything that can actually affect patient life, and we're purely working in the back office, which is not always the case for us, but is the majority of the work that we do in documentation. Generally, hospital operators are a lot more receptive. Additionally, I would say there's a couple of kind of tailwinds that have made this a little bit easier for us. One obvious one is just the overall, advent and acceptance of AI generally. I would say even a year or two ago, healthcare operators, it was not that big of a topic, and it felt like a huge facade, and it didn't feel like the value was actually there. And, you may know better than most, many people, not just in healthcare, but across the board, have been sold what is supposed to be AI that works, and maybe not actually work, or doesn't do the job as well as it claims to. I think in the last couple of years, healthcare and of course industries abroad have seen dramatic value being created, within organizations in a way that it's difficult to deny that they can be really, really useful, which makes it easier for some of the initial skepticism of being willing to take that first conversation with us. So that's one. I would say the second piece here is the way that all of healthcare has trended towards, both in terms of government regulation, reducing and cutting kind of various organizations, and insurance companies getting, in turn, sharkier and sharkier when it comes to, payments and reimbursements. All the margins have gone down significantly in healthcare, as I'm sure you know. And because of that, more than ever, there, all businesses are, but certainly many hospitals and healthcare providers feel that they have to look for any opportunity to, decrease their operating margins, to try and make it more efficient and, more cost effective. Anywhere where you can find, more revenue, or, decrease the cost of, what it takes to administer care, on the business side of medicine, I would say they're much more open to. They have to look for things, and again, when the AI is truly able to create value, either by saving you time or money, people are much more willing to have a conversation together.
Definitely. Now, I'm curious, how's the AI battle between optimizing billing and coding from your end and the AI on the health insurance companies' end to try to make sure many more claims are denied rather than approved?
It's a funny question. It's a funny question. I would say, in theory, what you're saying makes a lot of sense. In fact, a lot of people actually ask us, you know, especially from investors, actually, like, this works so well for hospitals and health providers. Why don't you just sell this to insurance companies? Instead of reviewing notes for providers, just review it for insurance companies. Take away money, and you can make so much money together.
Yeah.
I think the reality actually is it's quite a little bit misconstrued here. I think like the idea that insurance companies like to deny claims, or really want to deny claims, is not totally true. In fact, managing denials and prior authorizations and appeal letters is actually extremely expensive for insurance companies as well. For them to have to deal with all of this, and they get sued and go to court over this. I mean, it's a whole thing that they have to deal with too. Generally, when you are writing better documentation, and putting together the claims and bills correctly, it's better for all sides. And again, at the end of the day, it's not that we are finding money that is not deserved, or that we're getting providers paid for care that they didn't perform. Keep in mind, when we do billing and coding work, we both increase and decrease revenue in individual claims. It's that on balance, including both the increase of codes and the decrease of codes, that there is a double-digit revenue lift despite that, because there is so much more underbilling in healthcare that happens than overbilling. Now, at the end of the day here, we're looking to make sure that healthcare providers get reimbursed properly for care that was performed. And so it's usually not so bad overall. One other angle I can add into this also is with the advent of value-based care, which we haven't spent any time talking about today. The outcomes, of course, are more aligned here. where both payers and providers just want the patient to do better. And in those cases, which is of course the whole point of the design of the system, much of the work that we do is in value-based care. And it's, again, to really align the incentives here to help the patient, be healthier and stay out of the ER. And ultimately, it can be a win for all sides, including the patient, which is the most important stakeholder here.
Definitely. So a good documentation, good care makes everyone happy, from payers to billers to coders to physicians. And the patients, of course. And the patients, of course. Yes. Now,
absolutely.
Now there are different electronic medical record systems, out there. Some hospitals use, let's say, Epic, for example, or Cerner, or many other players out there in the market. Does your software integrate or incorporate easily to all these EMRs, or it functions independent without the need to integrate to them, so that you can have all this note review being done?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we almost always have to integrate with EMRs in some capacity, and some are more deeply integrated than others. But again, as you know, documentation lives in your EMR, and we are not going to change that, and we don't want to change that. It's where you're trained to work and where you like to work. Well, maybe you like to work there, but you have to work there in the EMR. And so regardless of what we'd like to do, we will always have to read the documentation and pull it out of the EMR. So in some way, there is going to be some integration that has to happen there. Beyond that, on an EMR by EMR basis, in many cases, we will have a deeper integration where, for example, we can review the note and actually write something back to the EMR. If you'd like us to update the chart directly or change something inside the coding, that is possible. Another example is usually when the end user is a clinician, we will not ask you to log into a new separate platform. That would be really annoying for you, and it's hard to control and educate physicians to use a completely new service. It would be very annoying for you.
Definitely.
And so in most cases, we will have to integrate with the EMR to kind of like push a message back to you or update the chart, or at the very minimum, send you an email, something that you're already used to using, rather than making you log into a separate platform. That said, I think a lot of the work does happen in a separate platform and allows us to kind of build a much more customized experience that is reflective of, not the UI of the EMR, but one where you can actually look at the notes we have reviewed. And, typically somebody in your back office or a supervising doctor can come in and review these notes based on what the AI has found.
Thanks for making that integration easy and smooth for us. Now, as a clinician writing my note, do I have to have any sort of training to use Charta Health, or that is a software that people in the administration and the billing and coding who's taking care of that? Do I interact with it in any way?
It's a good question. So generally, no. Certainly not as a clinician. In the back office, there could be a little bit. It's more on the configuration side, of setting this up together than it is, on an ongoing basis to train how to use. The nice thing about what the AI we use and most of the modern AI technologies that are, at least being useful, is our goal is really to mimic human behavior, to try and, work it in such a way that you should not be able to tell whether a human has reviewed your chart or whether an AI has reviewed that chart or that progress note. And so, it really depends on what we're looking at here. But again, generally the AI will review the notes and give that feedback directly back to you. It does not require you to change anything really about your workflow or the way that you want to perform care or write your documentation. It's, what I think makes some of these AI technologies really easy to use, including ours, is you don't have to, change anybody's jobs. You don't have to, hire or fire anybody. We can just come in and review notes. And in most cases, notes that were not being reviewed before at all. But everybody would love to review, and we can send the results of that feedback directly to you.
So the feedback is the feedback is sent after I've done my documentation. It's not like done live while I'm documenting my note. The software is telling me, hey, you are misdocumenting, or you're documenting incompletely and you need to add, more description, for example.
Good question. So in most cases, yes. That's the case. There are some nuances to this where that's not true. In some EMRs, we do have a deeper integration where we will review the notes in real time as the documentation is being written, and we can give you real-time feedback as to like what the code should be or what documentation is still missing here, what you still need to document to hit the codes that you're trying to bill for. We can do that. Even more interestingly, I think a lot of the work can actually happen even pre-visit. For example, we can review charts before you even see a patient. If we know that you're scheduled to see a patient in a few days, one of the things that we'll do is review the patient chart before you see them to prep chart for you. We can surface for you a summary of this patient's past. And more interestingly, we do this a lot in value-based care, actually. We will suspect potential diagnoses that you should actually be screening the patient for. As if a doctor had the time to really screen this patient, especially in primary care, you can imagine, and try and, advocate for you, like, hey, you should consider looking at this, and here's the evidence. This might be worth seeing the patient for. So it can actually influence the visit itself in a way that is, non-destructive to your existing workflow, in a way that attempts to be helpful.
That's very interesting. So you're saying that from the pre-visit review, it can identify, certain increased risk, let's say, diagnoses that the patient might have, and it would recommend me to take some action for it?
Absolutely. Exactly. I mean, when we think about chart review, we can review charts at any point. I mean, documentation is there before you see a patient. It's not, the first time most likely that the doctor has ever seen, or that the patient has seen a doctor. We can look at things besides just the visit note itself. We can look at, labs and medications, referrals from other doctors, other visit notes that you've had. We can look at, years or decades of your medical history to try and surface the things that are important to you. Whether it's suspecting a potential diagnosis or just surfacing an existing diagnosis that you may not have the time, to actually see by looking through this patient's medical history. The goal here is we will review the chart for you at really any point. And, reviewing the chart after the visit is certainly useful, but you can review the chart before the visit as well, and surface insights that can be relevant.
That's actually very helpful because it helps, streamline the work of the physicians in a way. Because, every time I see a complex patient, I'd have to go through tens and maybe, more sometimes of their own chart from same hospital, different hospitals, which makes it difficult to, catch up or be on top of all their diagnoses, all their past medical or surgical history, for example. So having those things surfaced and brought up to the attention of the physician is of great use.
Absolutely. Well, we try to be helpful. Yeah, especially I think for clinicians, for you, I think, if you're not in the back office, there's certainly anything we can do to review charts and be helpful to you is where we would build the AI to be useful for.
That's very nice. Now, does the software, let's say, automatically screens or reviews the patient's chart for all those who are coming to my clinic, let's say, before they arrive? Like, is that an automatic feature it has?
Absolutely. Yeah, that is a really, really common workflow that we will do together. Again, it really does depend on what your practice wants. In some specialties more than others, it makes more sense to screen patients before they actually come in for the visit. But absolutely, it's a very standard part of what we do. Reviewing things, pre-visit or post-visit are both very useful to the groups that we work with.
I've just had this idea now in clinical research. Shifting gears a little bit, clinical research sometimes some of the data is collected by reviewing prior patient records from distant in the past. Have your application ever been used in such scenarios yet?
No, we have not. So it's an interesting area, though. Perhaps we should look into it. Yeah, we've not quite used it to do clinical research trials or anything. It's totally possible. I mean, I think I don't know very much about clinical research, but screening patients for potential work of whether or not they're a good fit for your trial, for example, certainly seems like an interesting area to explore.
Right. Yeah. Because sometimes all what you need is retrospective data, and that you can do by reviewing all these medical records.
Totally. Yeah, I agree with you.
Now, does the software only focus on documentation, or it can also pick up trends and, let's say, lab values or images or EKGs or other, physical assessment, blood work that you do for the patients in your clinic?
Yes, good question. So we certainly look at more than just text-based documentation. We consider many of your labs and labs and medications, other reports and imaging to be part of your documentation. We will look at every one of those things. Now, there are certainly like limits, I would say, to the technology in some areas. Generally speaking, a lot of people don't realize this. These modern language models are not intended to be better than humans at a particular task. They're intended to be maybe a little bit better or around the same, but they're not necessarily, for example, intended to be able to detect cancer by looking at an image in a way that a human cannot. For example, if we're looking at data here, we certainly will look at labs and medications and scanned, handwritten faxes. That's a really standard part of what we look at. We can watch videos as well to try and analyze things, but ultimately, it's not the same kind of machine learning technology. It's often misconstrued here. It's not the same kind of thing where we can detect something that a human might not be able to detect, or at least I should say, it's not what the AI is good at. It's not what we specialize in.
Got it. Now, speaking of AI not being a replacement for humans yet, can I say is that, like, let's say I have my own small-sized private clinic practice, and in many instances, physicians do hire outside billers and coders to help them, managing their revenue cycles. Let's say I, contract with you. I'm using Charta Health. Can I say using Charta Health and a little bit of my own personal experience would be adequate to run the business side of things for my practice without the need of hiring external auditors and billers and coders?
That's a good question. Now, assuming a fee-for-service billing model here, revenue cycle is more complicated than just chart review. We are not like an end-to-end, RCM automation company or services company, of which there are many, organizations that try to be that. We specifically review your charts. We can do certain areas of this. Typically when you hire an external, MSO or some other billing organization to help, they're doing more than just coding or reviewing parts of your chart. They'll be helping with things like the billing aspect of this, putting together a claim, generating it, submitting it, dealing with your clearinghouse, looking at the denials, managing your appeals, working on payment reconciliations, maybe even doing your eligibility checks to begin with, your prior authorizations or your scheduling. There are many parts of the revenue cycle that we don't touch today as a company. And so while there are companies out there that try to be more end-to-end as a service to replace your billing, function entirely, we are not one of them. We focus pretty specifically on reviewing your charts today. Now, that said, like there are certainly external organizations, many of the folks we work with who were contracting with a specific services organization oftentimes to review their charts. In those cases, then you can do a full drop and replace. Or if you have like an external audit firm, this is really common that you will pay to sample your doctors, one per doctor per quarter or one per doctor per year. And you pay them a pretty absurd amount of money, per individual chart because it takes so long to audit. In those cases, it can actually make a lot of sense for you to use, AI instead.
Right. Interesting. The landscape of, insurance and the payers is continuously changing, and there's new rules and changes in the regulations all the time. I'm pretty sure that it makes things a little bit more challenging on your end. So how do you cope with this? I don't know if it's a fast paced, but this, dynamic system to make sure that your, software is up to date, so to say.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, certainly things are changing all the time in healthcare, but mostly on the payer and the regulation side. At the end of the day, writing good documentation doesn't have to change that much. There are some minor changes that will happen in regulation over time, but you can imagine even as a clinician yourself, it's not like you're being constantly retrained on how to write good documentation. There are certainly updates and you want to learn about and you'll have to fix. But for the most part, majority of your documentation stays pretty similar. Even coding and billing, while there are payer-specific regulations and, well, not so regulated, but they'll deny things, seemingly randomly, the ICD-10 coding itself or the CPT codes themselves are pretty standardized by, things like the World Health Organization, or it's a standard set of codes across not only just the United States, but, across the world. It does not change that often. And what is considered good clinical care also doesn't change that often. What is, I'm sure, as you know, it's not like every single day they're, changing the way that they teach you how to, perform care or change your documentation. Certainly happens over time. All of that said, I think, going back to our earlier point, one of the biggest strengths of this, these modern language models that we get a chance to work on, one of their biggest strengths is their adaptability. The way that you can train these models, it just like you can train humans. A new regulation comes in, you tell the team, from now on, we look for this and not this. In the past, you would have to have thousands, maybe millions of examples of records to throw into the model and train it how to perform better, and it's very, very difficult to adapt over time. Now with these more modern large language model technologies, you don't have to do all of that anymore, and within minutes or hours, we can make pretty dramatic changes to these models to actually program them into doing the behavior that we'd like to see.
Wow. And I don't know, have you considered introducing your software into places outside the US? Like, does their health insurance system differ to us that further reinforces or advocates for the use of the AI technology to kind of improve the success of the reimbursement of claims?
That's a really interesting question. We actually have had a few conversations before, but the short answer is no. I mean, the healthcare, I think the US market is already much, much larger than we can serve today. And, it is already far, there are enough problems, I would say, with US healthcare. And, US healthcare is not famously great.
Definitely.
There are enough problems for us to try and solve here. Certainly, I do think like the billing systems is probably what changes the most across the world. In Canada, for example, where it's mostly government funded, the world of reimbursements is very different than using private insurance companies. We've talked to some countries abroad that have asked us to do work with reimbursements. That's very different, oftentimes more centralized, arguably more efficient, in the hands of a few companies or the government itself. What does stay the same, so for the most part, is the standard of care. All politics aside, and all rules and regulations aside, for the most part, doctors generally, for the most part, agree on what good care looks like. And because of that, looking through these notes to make sure you're performing good care and writing good documentation is a pretty universal problem. Certainly, whether it's us or somebody else, I would expect that this would be an extremely useful piece of technology that will be able to help all kinds of healthcare organizations worldwide.
So, from your perspective, I'm curious, what makes a physician's note be inadequate or is not considered a good standard note for a certain patient?
Yeah, so we don't make these rules, to be clear. These rules are made by typically either the chief clinical side of things, where you tell us what good patient care looks like, or it's by the government or insurance companies who are telling us these are the rules and regulations we require. For the most, I can give you some examples of like common issues. I think like this won't surprise you. Everybody in healthcare knows this, but one of the doctor's favorite things to do is to copy paste notes from previous visits or other things that have happened in the past. This results in all kinds of potential issues. It can be as simple as like you use the wrong pronoun here. You're doing the same exact thing here that you did in the past, and you don't deserve to get billed for this. All the way to the things like the completely wrong care was performed here at all. It was like totally not relevant. I think those are really common. Coding incorrectly is another really, really common issue, as like it's pretty ironic. I think like doctors, like yourself, you go to medical school for years and years and years, but getting your professional coding certification is not one of those licenses you have to do. But in most of outpatient care, for example, the doctor themselves does have to do the billing and coding piece of this. And so, those are really, really common areas. But outside of that, I mean, like writing good documentation, performing good care really varies across the board, especially when new doctors, come into an organization. There's often potential issues with their documentation in their first, couple weeks or months at work.
One of the things that impressed me and a lot in your journey is that you've taken your degree or your certificate in billing and coding, and we as physicians, unfortunately, we did not do so. So Thank you for your curiosity in our world. Justin, this was a powerful conversation. What you're building with Charta Health sits at a space most people don't think about, but every clinician feels. Your team is showing that AI doesn't have to be this mysterious, scary force. It can actually be a tool that clears the noise and supports better decisions. Before we wrap, any final thoughts you would like to share with those tuning in?
No, I'm really happy to be here, and I think I appreciate the work that you do. I think getting a chance to serve clinicians like yourself who spent much longer getting educated and helping patients is why we do the work we do.
That's a wrap up for today's episode of the Scrubbed In series. Ladies and gentlemen, Justin, you're officially scrubbed in. To everyone listening, stay curious, stay driven, and stay bold enough to reimagine what's possible in healthcare. I'm your host, Tariq Resat, signing off. Thank you very much, Justin.
Thank you.